Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great session here at the 8th Annual UAGC Early Childhood Conference. This session is going to be an exciting one. It's called Screentime and its effect on oral language development and literacy skills. We have our very own Laurie Tess here. She is an associate faculty here at UAGC, and we are super excited that she is here with us today. All right, for just a moment, we kindly request your attention. In the spirit of transparency and utmost respect for our community, we have some information we'd like you to read on this disclaimer screen. And by taking a few moments to read through this disclaimer, you will empower yourself with important information regarding the boundaries of our knowledge sharing environment. All right, one more screen. Please take a moment to read through this slide, and together we're going to embark upon some exciting topics in early childhood education. Before we get started, though, I want to give Laurie the proper introduction. Laurie Tess is an associate faculty member for the UAGC Early Childhood Department. She has 39 years of experience in education, including daycare owner, director, elementary school teacher, reading specialist, and multilingual teacher. She is passionate about creating safe, nurturing, and culturally aware classrooms for children of all ages that allow them to thrive in a respectful environment. Laurie loves traveling with her husband, her children, her grandchildren. She loves to boat, read, write, and do yoga in her spare time. She's a certified yoga instructor and believes that even our youngest students can benefit from being mindful and the mindful movement. She's lived in southeastern Wisconsin all of her life, and she is a die-hard Packers fan. Laurie, I'm so excited. She is newly retired. She's super excited, and I'm so happy to have her. And Laurie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. As Tisha said, my name is Laurie Tess. I am an associate faculty member at UAGC. A little bit of my background, Tisha touched on it briefly, but I do have my bachelor's degree in elementary education from UW-Superior here in Wisconsin. I have my master's degree in reading from Concordia University in Wisconsin. And I have an add-on EL license from Edgewood College, and that's from Madison, Wisconsin. I have a lot of educational experience. I've worn many different hats, and that educational experience includes being a child care center owner and director for 17 years. While I was there, I worked on getting my bachelor's degree in a non-traditional online format. Once I completed that, I accepted a position as a 5th and 6th grade elementary school teacher in a small private school. While there, I worked on my reading specialist license. And when I completed that, I accepted a position in our district here in Burlington, Wisconsin, working with grades K through 5. And then in my most recent years, I have been an EL teacher working with kindergarten through 5th grade in our district as well. So just a little bit about me personally, too. I know Tisha touched on it. I'm celebrating 36 years of marriage this year to my husband, Larry. We have 3 adult children who I am so grateful. They live close to us. We have 3 beautiful grandchildren who are 8, 6, and almost 4. We love to boat and camp. My husband and I recently bought a very large RV, which I refuse to drive. But we've been on a few adventures with that, have some more trips planned. Excited about that. And in my spare time, I love to read. I love to do crafts, and an avid yoga practitioner and teacher. So with that, we will get started. So chances are that most of you who are listening or watching this have never known a time when there wasn't a World Wide Web. It seems like it's always been around, even for me, but believe it or not, we know that's not the case, even though it seems like it. So the birth of the World Wide Web on April 30th, 1983, the World Wide Web launched into the public domain, making it simple or relatively simple for anyone to explore this new thing called the internet. I remember exactly where I was when my husband and I first connected to the World Wide Web. Our desktop computer, monitor, and speakers took up our entire desk, but it was everything we needed to make this leap into this relatively unknown world. And when I say I remember where I was, I really do. We were in the room we used for an office in our very first apartment. And even though the web was established in 83, it wasn't until probably about 88, right after we were married, that we first connected. In retrospect, it was the slowest thing in the world, but at the same time, then it seemed amazingly fast and kind of like we were living a science fiction movie. And just take a look at that picture. I can remember this is pretty accurate. This looks like what we had on that desk, that huge monitor and tower. Looks like that one has a spot for a floppy disk. I don't even think we had that then. So that's what it looked like. So on this next slide, be ready for a good laugh here as we look at these pictures. So that bottom picture of a modern cell phone that we all recognize looks familiar, right? That top photo of the man holding that brick phone, yeah, that was a thing. And if you look at that gentleman, when I look at him, I think, oh, he thinks he's pretty cool with that brick phone there. Well, let me tell you, my husband, when he first got his, because he was a salesman and he thought he was the coolest thing in the world with that brick phone. We thought we were pretty cutting edge there. Um, as a matter of fact, he held on to that for a really, really long time, kind of as a keepsake. I think we finally just got rid of it. But from brick phone to handheld computer, we have come a long way. Now, if you would have told me that someday computers would be compact enough to fit in a backpack, I would have looked at you in disbelief. And if you had told me that someday most of us would have a pocket-sized device that would not only be a phone, but serve as a mini computer, I would have laughed. And yet, here we are. And honestly, for someone like me who graduated in 1980 and who grew up watching shows like The Jetsons, I would have thought it was one of their episodes we were living in. And if you don't know The Jetsons, you should check it out. One of my favorite cartoons. Um, and so many of those TV shows I watched in the 60s and 70s, and I know I'm dating myself, they were a lot more prophetic than I could have ever imagined. So we moved from the birth of the internet, the brick phone, all of those seemingly archaic pieces of technology to a place that we're at now. We are always connected. So let's talk about that a little bit. So this first bullet point simply talks about how the fact once the internet was a place to go, literally. You went to a place in your home where you connected, you looked for what you needed, and then you disconnected, both literally and figuratively. I remember that when we first had internet, we had something called dial-up. So some of you listening may have no idea what I'm talking about. However, some of you who are of a certain age will know exactly what I'm talking about. So we actually had to dial in to connect to the internet. I am still not even sure where we dialed into, but we had to dial in. I can still remember that sound. Some of you might know exactly what I'm talking about. And it took forever. And then when we were finished, we disconnected. And we couldn't just use our internet anywhere like we can now. We went to that room in our house, connected, and disconnected. Today, we are connected almost continuously, and our devices are almost extensions of ourselves. So today, as long as we have a Wi-Fi connection or a mobile hotspot, we can pretty much connect anywhere in the world. We really don't have to connect or disconnect. We're just always connected. And when I say our devices are extensions of ourselves, well, all we have to do is look around, right? We don't go anywhere without seeing people on their phones. We see it at dinner, at sporting events, waiting in line at the grocery store, and sadly, even when we're in the middle of a conversation with a real life person. This connection doesn't stop at using our devices for research. They have now become our most common forms of communication and socializing. So I remember when I first started using the internet, as most people, it was used really just for research to look things up. We didn't have email, we didn't have Facebook, nothing remotely like what we have now. So it wasn't a method of communication. Remember, we didn't really have cell phones then either. If we wanted to communicate with somebody, we used our landline. And we know that the ways to connect are endless. We can text, email, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm sure there's some that I'm missing. I remember the first form of social media I really ventured into was Facebook. And let me tell you, I was all in. I just thought it was so cool to be able to connect with so many people I'd lost touch with over the years. I think it's lost some of that purpose in the ensuing years, but it's still my preferred social media method. The rest of it, I've kind of dipped my toes in a little bit, Snapchat and Instagram, but I can barely figure those out. So I don't even worry about TikTok. But it just goes to show there are so many ways to communicate now that use technology. So it goes without saying that we've really come a long way, right? So we have gone from that era of using technology to research to using it for communication, socialization. This is just a little more information, though, about how we used to find information then and now. So I have a couple of pictures here. So that top picture is a set of World Book encyclopedias. And that is a set of encyclopedias that is sitting on my mom and dad's shelf today. As a matter of fact, I was just out there and took this picture about a month ago. And so what would happen is a salesman would come around, he'd do his spiel, he'd sell you these World Book encyclopedias, A through Z. And on the left-hand side there, you can see the end of the alphabet. And then the subscription included a yearbook. So every year you would get an updated yearbook. Obviously, the problem was they became out of date almost immediately, even with those yearbooks. But I loved encyclopedias. I remember spending so much time poring over the information in them. The bottom picture is how we look for books in the library, just a good old-fashioned card catalog. The problem was you had to know the name of the book or the author. You had to do a lot of cross-checking to find what you wanted. Now these old card catalogs are kind of collector pieces. I see them on TV shows and in people's homes as kind of almost a piece of furniture, which is kind of cool. Kind of shows that everything old is new again. So for those of us in school before the birth of the internet and the World Wide Web, here's what our technology might have looked like. And at times, the shift in technology seems really gradual. It feels as though it's always been with us. And for those of us who grew up with this technology, that's true. But for others, the explosion of technology in a mere 40 years is nothing short of mind-blowing. I graduated 44 years ago. So when I look at where we've come from what I used, it's kind of mind-blowing, kind of like science fiction. So let's talk about how we've moved from there. So we've moved from a technology that was mainly used for research, mostly in the hands of adults. And we know that today technology is everywhere, including in the hands of our children. So let's talk a little bit about how children use technology today. So when children and teachers first started using technology in the classroom, it was mainly used for research on the student's end and teaching and enhancing learning on the teacher's end. And in my years teaching in elementary school, I have seen and used some really great pieces of technology that support students' learning. I've also witnessed some of the negative aspects. But let's start with that first column there, research and education. There are a number of ways we can use technology in the classroom. YouTube, one of my favorites, can allow students to have access to different experiences and events that they might never have had the opportunity to have experienced. I think of it kind of as a way to fill in the background knowledge gap for some of our students. We see one-to-one Chromebooks in schools and cell phones. They allow students to access educational apps, take assessments, and gain practice and proficiency in reading and math and other subject areas. And For example, in our school district, all of our students have a Chromebook that's issued to them. It stays at school in the younger grades. Older grades can take them home. And different teachers in different grades have different policies on cell phone use, but those are becoming more prevalent as well. We have Google Classroom and Promethean boards. These are great. They allow the teacher to make content and the curriculum really more visual and hands-on and accessible to the students. And then I think one of the biggest, most exciting things we see is assistive technology. And this is really wonderful for those students who might have some learning disabilities or who might need special learning adaptations. But we've moved from just research and education to using technology in schools and at home for both entertainment and socializing. So a lot of our kids are used to using things like YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, and gaming. And you would be surprised at how young this starts. I remember when the year after we came back from COVID, all of the reading interventionists had to become classroom teachers that year so we could have smaller class sizes and safely distance socially. And I was a second grade teacher and we were working on writing. And one of the writing pieces my second grader did, it was something you know how to do well. And she did hers on makeup. And the last page of her little booklet was share on TikTok. So it just blows me away how much younger and younger children are using technology for entertainment and socializing. Again, the same types of apps, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and gaming. There's obviously pros and cons to all of this, but it's just kind of a way to acknowledge and understand and be aware of how much it has really changed. And so we know children use these things. Let's take a look or talk a little bit about what a day might look like in elementary school with technology. So again, what I'm going to share are just a few of the ways we might see technology being used in the classroom. It, of course, varies by teacher and district. And the list I'm about to share doesn't take into account all of the state and district testing that takes place throughout the year, all on computers. So you might walk into a classroom and see the morning announcements, maybe a science and social studies lesson on the Pro board, just starting the day out right away with that piece of technology. Students use their Chromebooks or their cell phones to do research using online resources. There are online reading apps and approved games during free time. I know a lot of times when we would have indoor recess, there were certain things students were allowed to get on the computer, including some of those reading apps and different games. In our district, we use something called iReady to reinforce math and reading skills. And so 3 times a year, they would take an assessment in iReady, and then based on the outcome of that assessment, it would create like a learning path for students. And so they could use that to gain proficiency in math and reading. These are just a few of the ways. They're, like I said, depending on the district policies, the grade level, you could have more or less. So we have all this technology. We're seeing it in schools at younger and younger ages. So let's talk a little bit about, does this technology hinder expressive language use in young children? So first, we need to understand that over the last decade, there has been this huge shift in how children and families are spending their time. Children today spend an unprecedented amount of time watching or interacting with their screens, whether that's at home or whether it's at school. There was a study I saw once that talked about the fact that 81% of children had access to tablets in the home in 2020, compared to only 14% in 2012. So 8 years difference, we see that huge increase. So most research suggests a strong link between screen time and language delays. So this was from a study by Butani that was done in 2023, so pretty recent. We must keep in mind, however, that some of these studies may not take into account considerations such as the content, the time spent, and whether the child is on their screen alone or with somebody. So there's a lot of things to take into account. Another study by Gellner in 2023, it was a study in the Journal of the AMA, American Medical Association, showed that more screen time in 1-year-olds was associated with developmental delays in communication by the ages of 2 to 4. This same study, interestingly, also showed there was a correlation between more screen time with problem solving skills. And it showed what's called a dose response delay, meaning that the more exposure, the more likely there were to be delays. And then there was a meta-analysis done by GAP in 2023 of 42 studies examining screen use and children's language skills, and it showed that more screen usage was associated with lower language skills. So again, we have to keep in mind there are thousands of studies out there. We could find hundreds of studies that show that there is a negative effect. We could find just as many studies that show there isn't. These were some that just kind of stuck out to me and kind of makes sense, which I'll talk a little bit more about here shortly. But let's just take a look at that picture there. So you might look at that picture and all those children on their cell phones, you might think that's kind of an exaggeration, but honestly, it's becoming more accurate than we might care to believe. I saw it a lot in elementary school, the number of children who are coming to school with cell phones in the younger and younger ages. It's pretty astounding. So if studies show that overuse or misuse of technology can cause language delays, then it stands to reason that literacy will be affected. It's a domino effect, this effect of delayed language on future literacy. Let's talk about some of the ways that can happen. So children who have poor language skills and or language delays are more likely to have difficulties with reading and writing once they enter school. And this just makes sense. So children who start school with delays typically take longer to catch up, and it becomes harder to close that gap. I've seen this firsthand as a reading specialist. I know how hard it can be. And we know that oral language is important. It's a precursor to reading and writing. And when this is delayed, it just causes a domino effect. You know, of course, there's many reasons a child may have a language delay, but we have to ask ourselves, is this a trend that's being exacerbated by earlier screen time for longer periods of time? So another thing that happens is the human interaction necessary for shared reading and discussion is lost, affecting comprehension. And so what I mean by this is when children read with someone, whether it's an adult, whether it's with a peer, there's a lot of discussion that can take place. Comprehension is a very difficult skill. And when we can have those human interactions and discuss what we're reading, it helps our comprehension. But when we're doing that by ourselves on a screen, we lose a lot of that. Stories that are in digital form are less likely to support children's story comprehension and vocabulary learning due to overstimulation and cognitive interference from digital books. So don't get me wrong, digital stories definitely have their advantages. There are some great sites out there with digital stories. I think of my EL students who are learning English and how important it is to have those stories in their home language available to them. They can listen and hear their home language. It's a great comfort to them. However, we do know that too much screen time, even in adults, can overstimulate us. And when that happens, we begin to lose our ability to focus. And that again affects comprehension. So I love this picture here. It just makes me smile. It looks so cozy. Looks like they're in a tent with lights, little girl, and what I'm assuming is her father reading a book together. And just, if we could listen into that, what kind of conversations are they having, talking about the story? Those human connections are super important, and they are not always there when we read things digitally. So we talked a little bit about how technology might hinder language and how that in turn can affect early literacy. Well, this can continue to be seen in students' reading and writing proficiency as they move through elementary school. One of the biggest things that I see, and I see it all the time, is capitalization, spelling, and punctuation are affected. Part of it is because we have all of these apps and forms of communicating with one another that don't value those things. We use abbreviations, acronyms, incomplete sentences, no punctuation or capitalization. I see it all the time. Fourth, fifth, and sixth graders who don't capitalize their sentences or don't know how to use punctuation. And this trickles all the way up through high school, college. We see this. One of the biggest things, and this is one that is really fascinating to me and that I've been doing a lot of research on myself, the ability to focus on longer, unbroken pieces of text is diminished. So there's been a lot of research done that suggests because we have become accustomed to reading and researching online, that we can't focus on longer pieces of text in a regular book. So think about what happens when you read something online. It's broken up all the time by ads, videos, pictures, pop-ups, hyperlinks. These are all distractions. So our brains are really becoming wired to read more shallowly instead of deeply and with focus. I recognize this in myself, and it's kind of scary. I used to be able to sit for an hour straight reading a book. Now I read a few pages or a chapter, and I just feel the need to get up and move or do something else. I feel like I need it to be broken up. This is just fascinating to me. So this is a big one. Students struggle with knowing how to research a topic as it relates to content and context. So children have become so used to using the internet to do their research and to do the work for them. They don't know the different ways to search for things. They'll often pick the very first item that shows up on a Google search, even though it is not remotely related to the topic or the context of what they're being asked. That happens all the time. Younger children cannot comprehend and incorporate the knowledge learned through digital media. I don't know if I agree with this 100%. I believe it is more difficult for younger children, especially, to comprehend and incorporate that knowledge. Basically, what this means is that children have a hard time assimilating the content of digital media into their real world experiences. And let's think about it. A lot of what is online, it is hard for adults to determine what's fact and what's fiction. And so imagine how difficult that is for young children. And so for them to make those real world connections, it's really difficult unless they have family members or caregivers or educators who are there with them to help enhance their comprehension. So we've talked a lot about the domino effect of technology. What are some negatives for sure that we are seeing? But as with everything, it's not all bad news, right? There are good things about everything. I believe that anyway. Whether it's at home or at school, there are great things that can be derived from technology. Let's start with the at-home pieces. It can help children acquire language and literacy. I know that seems contradictory because we talked about how it can cause delays, but we also talked about the importance of that human connection and interaction. And if that's there, you can acquire language and literacy. It helps promote pro-social and imaginative play, and it helps students become more adept at the use of technology once they begin school. Because when kids enter kindergarten, they're already using a Chromebook. So with guidance, the use of educational apps and games can really be engaging for young children. It can spark their curiosity and help them develop language and literacy when used responsibly and with supervision. So the same thing applies to at school. There are many benefits. Technology can help our students connect with students of other cultures and backgrounds. For example, they can have virtual pen pals, take virtual tours and field trips to other countries. Um, Technology can help with vocabulary acquisition and phonetic foundations. There are so many educational activities out there that help children develop proficiency and mastery in reading and phonics. And it gives them experiences they might not have at home. So, for example, it can build background knowledge for students who might not have access to a variety of events and experiences. Maybe there are socioeconomic factors and considerations or language barriers that prevent them from having those experiences we often assume children have. Maybe they can take a virtual field trip of a zoo, something maybe they can't do in real life. So there's a lot of really great things that families and educators can do with technology. But again, we have to remember that responsible piece and that human connection piece. So I'm going to share, excuse me, just some tips for parents and educators. So we'll start with the families column here. So one thing families can do and caregivers can do is to pose questions and interact with children during their screen time. So as we talked about earlier, when we allow students to be on technology unsupervised, it means they're missing out on that human element. But when families and children interact together, that piece comes back into play. And when we pose those questions and have those discussions, we're promoting cognitive and language development in our children at a younger age. According to the World Health Organization, screen time should be limited to 1 hour per day for children ages 2 through 5, and no screen time for children under 18 months. This was a study done by Gellner in 2023. And of course, this is just one study, one guideline. And as always, parents should use their judgment. But as we discussed earlier, there are studies that show length of screen time and how early children start with technology can have an effect on their language development. We can, as caregivers and parents, help children apply what they're watching. We talked about this a little bit before, helping them connect what they're reading, seeing, and hearing to the world around them. And this can apply to non-digital text as well. And then making sure the focus is on educational apps. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with just entertainment. I mean, my grandkids love Bluey and Masha and the Bear, and I don't even know what some of them are. And they're fun and silly, and that's perfectly fine. But when we're talking about language development and literacy development, making sure that they are educational is really important. Educators, we have a big responsibility, right, with technology in our classrooms. So just a few tips here. First one, super important. I'm really passionate about this one. Model and discuss appropriate tech use. Most districts, ours included, have a technology agreement parents need to sign. Their children need to promise that they'll use the technology responsibly and appropriately. And if not, parents are liable for that. But even when you think you are on top of it, I am here to tell you these kids find a workaround. They are so tech savvy. So I'll give you an example. So I worked with K through 4 students or K through 5 students, and our fourth graders who are a particularly tech savvy group. And our tech department, first of all, is amazing. They are really on top of what's appropriate. If there are concerns, if they see a child's on something not school approved, or if a parent were to bring up a concern, they would block that site. And they have. There were several games or apps that kids were getting on that were incredibly inappropriate. And so they blocked them. And somehow this small group of fourth graders figured out how to get around that. I don't know how, because I don't even know how, but they were able to get around it and get back on those sites. So we always have to be vigilant because they are smarter than we give them credit for. Another thing we can do is share our favorite apps. You know, these kids have grown up with technology. This is what they know. And sometimes they think of their teachers as these old dinosaurs. And when we can share that we enjoy technology and we have favorite apps, of course, appropriate ones that if we're sharing, you know, that just, it allows us to make just one more connection with our student. I think it's really important to give students opportunities to interact with hard copy print. You know, that Promethean board is great. It's huge. It displays things in color. It can be very visual. But when we're talking about lines of text, whether it's the Pro board or their Chromebook, you know, we have a lot of eye strain when we stare at the computer all the time. Also, I think it's really important, and it's my preferred method is to have a hard copy in front of me because I like to mark up my text. And that actually is a skill we teach our students, how to annotate text. And it's just easier to do on a hard copy. And then I think finally, just taking tech breaks, having no tech days. Because guess what? We used to do it, right? There was a time we didn't have all this technology. And I know even myself as a teacher, I use technology all the time for planning lessons, curriculum, different things. And it takes a little resourcefulness, a little creativity, but it can be done without technology. And just even if it's a half a no tech day, I think that's really, really important. So there are a lot of things that we can do to make technology safe and engaging. Um, so as we kind of wrap up here, I would just like to share just a few more things. So as with all things, it's all about balance, right? There's nothing all bad or all good about any one thing, you know, technology included. We could search online and we could find huge amounts of information about why technology in early childhood and early elementary school is detrimental to learning and language development. But we could just as easily find copious amounts of information about the positive effects of technology. We've talked about some of that here. You know, as educators, we have this huge responsibility to do our research with an open mind and also a little common sense. We want to give our students what they need to develop those language and literacy skills. And it starts from infancy on with that oral language piece. And we can never forget the importance of that human component and that human interaction that helps to support that. And this is really important. That human interaction doesn't just go away when children get older. Their sense of curiosity about the world hopefully continues to grow through junior high, high school, college, and beyond. And we want to be there to foster that curiosity by being available for discussion and to answer their questions. Believe me, I use technology a lot, probably more than I should sometimes. I recognize its value, and I also recognize its appeal. And I think that when it's used properly and with responsibility, it can be an incredible tool for our students. But I also believe that educators and families need to work together to facilitate the use of this tool to help our children successfully navigate this fascinating world of technology. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. I hope I've given you something to think about.
Laurie, as always, I'm asking you to start your video. That was amazing. You did a great job. This is such relevant and important information. I hope that each of you can take something away from this and use it with families to help support families to use in your own home. And I hope you will take time to join another session soon. Talk to you later. Have a great day.